Our next two presenters will continue to talk about busting the warehousing myth. First up will be Mike Fry, who is the Executive Director of Animal Ark in Hastings, Minnesota. It's the state's largest no-kill shelter, and he's also the host of Animal Wise Radio. So with that, we'll start with Mike.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I would just like to say I am incredibly proud and pleased to be at this event. A big special thanks to Maddie's Fund and HSUS for putting this conference on. What an amazing achievement, and a big thanks especially to Lynn Spivak for all the work that she's done getting this put together. The theme that I want to put to this presentation is that what you can hold in your mind, you can create. I firmly believe that that's true. And I know that that's true because if you look at the animal welfare movement, it's always taken creative thinking, people thinking out of the box in order to make changes happen. I'm going to ask you now, right now, how many of you believe when animals come to animal shelters, they are currently likely to develop behavior or medical problems in those shelters? And I believe for couple hundred years, that has been the case. That has been absolutely true. But in the early mid-1990s, the president of Maddie's Fund decided he didn't necessarily think that it had to be that way. He began thinking out of the box, and he asked the architects at ARQ Architects to design an entirely new shelter. He didn't want it to smell. He wanted it to be home-like. He didn't want there to be a lot of loud barking. He wanted it to be inviting for people, and he wanted it to be a place that animals would want to live and people would want to visit. Entirely out of the box. And he went on to build the Maddie's Adoption Center at the San Francisco SPCA. Breathtaking facility built, I don't remember what the budget was. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 bazillion. I don't know. It may as well have been from my perspective because at the time I was volunteering for a very small, very poor, very rural animal shelter in Minnesota. But a group of us went to Maddie's Adoption Center just to see it. And we were overwhelmed by its beauty and its function. And we decided, well, okay, it's great, but what is a poor rural shelter supposed to do if we're going to try to accomplish that? And to give you a little perspective about who Animal Ark was in the 1990s, this is a map of the Twin Cities metro area of Minneapolis and St. Paul, which is a population of about 2.8 million people. The little A down in the lower part of the map, that's where our shelter is, about 35 miles south in a little town of about 15,000 people. Very small community. So again, about 35 miles outside of the metro area. And we had an annual operating budget of less than $300,000. It was actually about $250,000. That's how much money we had coming in each year. We had no money in the bank, zero. I'm not kidding. And the shelter that we had was in serious disrepair. So you can imagine how we felt getting on the plane coming back from the Maddie's Adoption Center. You know, it may as well have been built for $700 bazillion because whatever it cost, we couldn't come up with it. But we wanted, at the same time, to say, what can we learn from the Maddie's Adoption Center to apply to our small, poor, rural shelter? And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. To give you a sense of where we started, our lobby and our facility was so bad, we rarely took pictures of it. But during Hurricane Katrina, for example, we had a reporter there. Our lobby is over on the left, the before. Here's the after. Now looks like a luxury bed and breakfast. Our cat areas went from typical stainless steel cages to beautiful luxury apartments modeled after those at the Maddie's Adoption Center. Dog kennels are still dog kennels, but they went from horrible, disgusting, filthy small kennels to big, luxurious, clean kennels. And we changed everything else about our shelter at the same time. One piece I forgot to mention is that when I came to Animal Ark, we were already a no-kill shelter. And we have signed an adoption guarantee long ago, basically, with our local animal control center. All of the animals in Hastings, Rosemount, and the surrounding communities are guaranteed a place to go and guaranteed a home, but we still had concern over the quality of the experience of animals going through our facility. So this was not necessarily done with the idea of saving more animals. We were saving all of them in our community. Our goal, however, was to make their experience better and set a no-kill example for our state, with the goal of making Minnesota the first no-kill state in the country. And when we decided to do that, we realized we had to rethink everything about our shelter. We had to rethink housing, vet care, nutrition, socialization, play, exercise, and training. And we realized that the enrichment of the shelter environment was for all species, and that includes the humans that come to visit there. So you'll notice in our cat condos, we have these, and the rabbit condos and everywhere, we have pretty and functional educational material kind of woven through the whole space. And by the way, it's worth noting, even our rabbits live cage-free. And what we found is that just seeing rabbits outside of cages in clean rooms with litter pans, the numbers of people who have an educational experience just from seeing that is pretty profound. Most people are just shocked that you can litter train rabbits, but you don't have to tell them that they can just see it by walking past our little rabbit condo. And we're fortunate enough that as we developed and went on through this process, people were coming forward to support us. These are actually original works of art by a beautiful artist who's one of the founders of Best Friends Animal Society. His name is Cyrus Mejia. He started a art project that's now touring the United States called Pits in Perspective, or Pits in Perception. These are the first 6 original pieces of art that started that series. A generous donor loved them so much and wanted to add to the ambiance of our place. She bought them for us. And what you don't see is next to it, there's this beautiful sign that talks about the history of pit bulls in the United States going all the way back to Spanky and the gang. And so what we've done is integrate the art and the information and the full experience through the whole facility. Our socialization rooms, people think it's crazy when we wanted to put flat screen TVs on the walls with YouTube access and preloaded movies, but guess what? When our volunteers come in to work with puppy mill dogs that are scared out of their mind, if they can curl up on a sofa with that dog and watch a feature-length film, they're gonna stay there for at least 2 hours, right? And it's worth noting all of the things that I'm going to talk to you about here just really don't take a pile of money. Obviously, when we started, we had none of it. Literally none of it. And in fact, when we started building our cat condos that we're going to look at in more detail, they cost less money to build than traditional housing. Those stainless steel cages are expensive. These luxury apartments for cats really are not. The cat condos, I believe, also save us a significant amount of money on vet care. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about why that is true. They dramatically increase adoptions at the same time. The entire process of thinking out of the box and thinking about shelter enrichment requires you to really, again, rethink everything from disinfecting, daily cleaning, nutrition, and socialization. I mean, think about it. If you've got cats that are in stainless steel cages, you've got to pull the cats out of the cage to socialize with them, or take them to another room and socialize with them. All of that goes away when you rethink the shelter system from this new approach. When you're thinking about cleaning, I just want to ask a question to the audience. In a cat cage, what do you think is the best disinfectant against feline disease in that cage? Well, I'm going to say it's a healthy feline immune system. You know, those cleaners you'll apply periodically. If the cat is healthy and its immune system is actively killing agents, the cat's not going to get infected with disease. And its body is going to be constantly killing any agents that come to it. It's the absolute best disinfectant. And given the fact that if the cats are living there and not getting sick, isn't that kind of the whole point? And stress is, as they talked about in the early part of the morning, is the number one thing that causes the cats to get sick in the first place. So if you can make their experience not stressful, you can eliminate a whole bunch of disease. This is, the traditional approach to sheltering, and let's look what it does. In this situation, the animals are stressed. Stress weakens the immune system. Germs and spores easily move from cage to cage. People are going into this cage, handling a cat, going over, handling the next cat. Any idea that those cages are in any way sterile or clean is a figment of our imagination. It's just not true. Not to mention the fact that it forces the animals to sit, if they're infected with the disease, then they're probably eliminating some of that virus in their litter box, and then we make them sit right next to their litter box so they can keep reinfecting themselves over and over and over. It's actually an incubator for disease. And at the same time, it separates the animals from people, it reduces adoptions, and increases the numbers of animals that you need to house, and all at the same time increasing disease. Other presenters have talked about this phenomenon, so I won't talk about it a lot. I call it I'm a tech geek by trade and background, so I think of it as a bandwidth issue. You've got to move animals from the shelter over there on the left through the adoption process and into new homes. And if you've got a bottleneck there for any reason that's causing it to happen, you're going to end up with a shelter overpopulation problem. What we have for years in our society been calling pet overpopulation, I think, is actually a shelter overpopulation problem. It's not a pet overpopulation problem in your community. It's a shelter overpopulation problem that we've all been seeing. And by changing your shelter, you can open up that bottleneck and move more animals through more quickly by keeping them healthier. When I first came to Animal Ark, it was a small, poor rural shelter. When I said this building was in disrepair, that was the most polite way that I could have put that. I oftentimes use expletives. This area you're looking at here used to be a big open room filled with stainless steel cages. What we did is we came back from Maddie's adoption center and we said, wow, we can't do that. We don't have $800 bazillion. And I was kind of moping around this area, and I thought, well, but what can we do? There's got to be something that we can do. And so I thought, well, if the cages weren't here, how much room would we have? And I was surprised when I measured it without the cages, how much room those cages were taking up, because you needed to have the cage, you needed to have room to open the door, then you needed room for the people to stand outside the door, then you needed room for people to walk behind the people standing behind, and by the time you added it all up, it was a huge amount of space that those cages were taking up. And I realized if they weren't there and we left a narrow corridor to walk through that room, we had room for 3 beautiful condominiums that admittedly wouldn't hold as many cats as were housed there previously, but I believed in my bones if we reduced the number we were housing at that moment, we could maybe move them through more quickly through that bottleneck, and we could ultimately save more animals. So it wasn't about how many you could house, it was about how many you could throughput. Again, the bandwidth idea. So with a lot of resistance from everyone that we pretty much knew, I was able to convince them to let us build these first 3 cat apartments. And all we did is to get the money, we just put an interactive map of the apartments, a little spec drawing on our website, and we allowed people to sponsor these little apartments. And within literally 2 weeks, every one of those condos was sponsored, fully paid for, and the construction was done shortly thereafter. It was so successful, in fact, that we decided there was another wing of our cat center that was just a wide open colony room that would typically house up to 20 cats at one time. And we decided, well, gosh, we didn't really like the big colony housing either, So maybe we could convert that into condos. The problem with this one wing, you can see how awful it was, but the big problem with that being an open room was that when people would come to visit, the room would accommodate basically one family at a time. They would walk in, they'd be seeing maybe 20 cats, and then another family would come in and the other family would feel like they needed to leave, or shy cats would constantly hide. Managing the population of cats was a nightmare. So we decided we wanted to get rid of that and turn it into cat apartments as well. And so this is a picture of when we first started putting the studs in that big, huge room to split it up into condominiums. And again, paid for all by sponsorships via the internet. Every condo has got its own separate air sources for in and out. It's got built-in custom cat furniture, ceramic tile, track lighting, classical music. The largest of them measure 7 by 14 feet. They have valances and all kinds of other amenities. And let me tell you, the kitties just love them. As a result of this, we've increased adoptions. The cat adoptions have just taken off. And you can imagine in those what were used to be those big wings of colony rooms that would accommodate 1 or 2 families at the most, we can now fit 7 or 8 families in there interacting with cats at one time. We have virtually 0 ringworm. The only ringworm we ever see is in animals that have brought it into the building. We've not had any outbreaks that have spread through the building in more than 5 years. Dramatic reduction in upper respiratory. And it's really great because you can easily accommodate very challenging felines by putting them in a condo and just locking the door and giving limited access to the trained volunteers who are working to socialize those very fearful cats. So our experience with it has been absolutely spectacular. What happened with us is the cat renovations were the first phase of our total shelter renovation. When people saw the work we were doing with the cat apartments, money started pouring in to renovate the dog kennels, to renovate the adoption center, and before you know it, our entire shelter was redone. But we had to start somewhere, and even though it looked like we had no way to do it, the good work just brought more good work with it. And I would just point out, as we went through that process, we obviously had to figure out that the enrichment in the shelter had to vary dramatically, whether you're talking about the adoption floor, the quarantine or isolation areas, or the health status of the animal. But throughout our entire facility, we are always looking at what is the experience of this animal in our shelter. How can we make that experience better for that animal? So in our cat isolation area, for example, we have stainless steel cages still, some, not very many, but they're 6 feet long, 3 feet deep, and in every stainless steel cage in the isolation area, the cats get cat beds, they get cat trees, they get hide boxes, they get toys, and so we're always looking to make sure that the shelter experience for the animal is as close to like being in a home as humanly possible. And obviously it's going to vary by health status. You're not going to take a parvo puppy out into the yard and play with it. In our dog kennels, we did things like making sure that the dog kennels don't face each other. It keeps barking dramatically reduced. Like in the cat areas, we reduced the number of animals being housed, but made the kennels much larger and made it more possible for dogs to live together in larger kennels. We scheduled regular potty breaks for our dogs so that right now at our shelter, every dog is on a schedule with at least 3 potty breaks scheduled by staff in outside play yards every day. In addition to that, they get training, they get walking from volunteers, and they get other activities. But at minimum, we know that on a certain schedule, every dog is going to know when it's going to be able to get outside to go to the bathroom. Good for the dogs, it's also good for the cleaning staff. And we make sure that in those luxurious kennels, every dog has beds, blankets, toys, treats, and music. And I remember when I first started at Animal Ark, they were giving blankets to dogs, but if the dog would chew up the blankets, they would stop giving them the blankets. And we'd have stacks of blankets, in storage. He would say, well, so-and-so doesn't have a blanket. Well, they chewed up their last one. Well, give him, did he swallow any? Well, no. Well, then give them another one. And so I believe the only time you don't give them those things is if they're potentially dangerous to the animals. Obviously, if they're eating and swallowing blankets, you don't want to give them any. But you know what? Here's the thing. If you give them a blanket and they chew it up, and you give them another one, if you keep doing that, sooner or later, they actually just stop chewing them up. They figure it out. I would also like to say a few words about flooring. This was, I think, one of the most important enrichment things for the dogs that I found. And when I came to Animal Ark, the floors were like an concrete epoxy floor, slippery when wet, cold. Dogs, even though we gave them raised beds, would spend a lot of time on the floor, and I can't prove it, but I had believed at the time that there were likely ACL injuries to the dog's knees as a result of the slippery floors. And I found a product called Protect-All flooring. It's unbelievably expensive, but it's absolutely amazing. It's warm, non-slip, it's impervious to everything, it's indestructible. They actually use it for indoor horse tracks, so horses can run on it. You can drop a sledgehammer on that floor and it won't damage the floor. It absorbs sound, and the dogs just find it very comfortable. When it's wet, people don't slip on it, so I highly recommend it. I mean, think about, and the point of that, I think, is if you go into your dog kennels and look at the kennel from the dog's perspective, how many of you would want to, if you don't want to go into your dog kennels and lay on the floor, your dog probably doesn't want to either. We also have a real strict policy at Animal Ark that even if you've got great kennels and everything's going great inside your shelter, get your dogs outside. I mean, they really, really want to be outside. We installed and built an outdoor off-leash play area that we call the Ark Park. It's open to the public. We use it for our dog training, off-leash dog training. This is the more sterile staff area for our dogs. But the old saying, a tired dog is a good dog, is really true. If your dogs are exhausted by the time people show up, they're gonna see a lot of really well-behaved dogs. And think, outside of just the basic stuff of dog walking. We have obedience training for the longer-term dogs at our facility. We go on to agility training, play and socialization. We even have a couple of these specially built bikes. We're fortunate enough that we're like less than a block away from a state park with paved walking trails and a river that runs through it and beautiful bridges and things. So we have trained volunteers who can take these bikes out with the dogs. It's very safe compared to a two-wheel bike, and trust me, for some of those really large dogs that need to really move distances, you can tire them out really, really well, and inexpensive, and the volunteers love it. Here's doing some obedience training and agility training out in the Ark Park with our volunteers. And think beyond other kinds of socialization. We periodically, I don't know if it's because we are just considered weird or what, but we have a lot of what I'll call special practitioners. Animal community, people in the alternative realms, people who do animal communication, various kinds of animal massage, T-touch. They'll call us up and want to come down and hold classes at our shelter. And so I'll just to say this, our standard policy is, and if they're gonna be gentle and nice to the animals, I don't care if they call me up and say, I channel energy from the angelic kingdom, and I don't care. I mean, if they're going to sit in a socialization room with our dogs and channel energy from the angelic kingdom, you go for it. Because for all I know, maybe they are. And even if they're not, the dog gets to sit on somebody's lap for a couple hours. And in our socialization rooms, we kind of went over the top, built-in fireplaces, very comfortable furniture, again, flat screen TVs, wall-mounted. Each unit has got its own privately fenced yard, so if a family wants to hang out with a dog, they want to let it out, they can literally just open the door and let it go to the bathroom. And let me tell you, the experience of people and animals in the facility has 100% dramatically changed as a result. But beyond that, I would also suggest that in the places that aren't so pretty, that shelters should make every place in their shelter friendly to animals. Incorporate animals in every space. This is an old break room. Make sure if you're checking your shelter to see if people are really taking care of the dogs, I expect to see animals in every inch of our shelter. I expect them to be fully using all the space. And I'll tell you, the one thing that was a little unexpected for us is that we were able, as a result of this, to begin helping dogs and cats that we never thought we would otherwise be able to help. I'm just going to go back a little bit because I think I had a whole chunk of this in the presentation that I took out. But the dog that's laying on top of me on the left, her name is Kiki. She was actually live trapped on the Red Lake Indian Reservation on the northern border of Minnesota as an adult dog. Had never been around humans ever. By all accounts, most people would have said that she should have not been savable by any means. She's now a happy, friendly, loving dog who would have been here today, except for they wouldn't let her on the plane. But she does regular public appearances, and if she was in this room, she would want to run up and meet each one of you and give you a kiss. So and none of that, helping that dog and others like her that have followed since would not have been possible in a traditional kind of shelter. Because, when I asked in the beginning of the presentation, do shelters develop behavior problems? Most all of you said yes. So what does it mean for the animals that come in with behavior problems? I believe that it's not only realistic, and here's a work with another feral dog. Well, what we do with the feral dogs now is we just put them right in our office. This is an area of our office administration area, and the staff typically doesn't get bit by them. If you don't confront them, they leave you alone, they're afraid, and you just gradually work them closer and closer, and when every single day they're surrounded by people who feed them and love them and care for them, that's how it works out, and that's, I guess, again, Kiki's story. I also would like to just re-emphasize some of the things that people have said before and make a special comment about the staff. We have a sort of expectation from our staff people that they're going to go above and beyond their job descriptions pretty much every day. This is our kennel manager who manages the dog area, but in his spare time, he comes to the shelter and will maintain the cat apartments. So he will resand the walls of every condo every year or so, repaint, just keep them pristine and new. And we won't assign those tasks, obviously, but we just kind of expect that every one of our staff people is going to be doing something like that. And if they don't, you know that they're likely not fully committed to the cause. And I'd also like you to just think about whenever you have to do something that is unpleasant for the dogs or cats, think about it from their perspective. Every time you've got to put a muzzle on a dog, anytime you've got to wrestle a dog to do a veterinary procedure, you're taking that dog's or cat's experience down a notch, and you're making it more difficult to get them placed into a home, not easier. And so this is our shelter manager, actually, it's hard to see what she's doing, but getting ready to put a muzzle on a dog. When we do that, we will put treats in the muzzle. We will practice putting them on 4 or 5 times the first time, and we will warm them up to the idea of getting it on their face so that they don't have to have it wrestled on them, and we make it a happy, fun experience to get the muzzle put on their face. The bottom line is this. Enrichment is about making life at the shelter the best it can be in every possible way. It's more fun for the staff, for the animals, and for the volunteers and clients. There's just no reason to not do it. No matter what excuses you might have for not doing it, throw them all out the window and find out, as an earlier presenter said, what can I do today to start that process? So I'm pretty much out of time, and thank you very much.